Okay, here we are. We're live for the second time this morning. Ken's Mental Health Podcast is rolling, and we are joined by Stanford Spurlock from the great state of New Hampshire, but he's bounced around a little bit, originally from the East Coast, and he's going to tell us about his travels. Also joining us, Michael Sodini. I'm Jake
What's
Gershin. I'm
happening?
in Reno. Mike's in Las Vegas, and Kevin Barry are, what adjective should I pick this morning? Illustrative producer is in Utah. Welcome, Stanford. How are you?
I'm well, thanks. I'm excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for reaching out. You just kind of cold called us, which sometimes people do. And we're, if they fit the profile and seem like somebody interesting we'd like to talk to, we have them on the show, and we don't know you really at all outside of the 5 minutes we spent chatting, but the email looked good and your website looked good. You're a therapist, which resonates with my heart, and you're also a gun guy. So I don't know, kick it over to you and let you tell everybody else, who you are, how you came to be, and then we'll roll with the conversation.
Yeah. So funny enough, there was maybe a couple, 2, 3 months where I had been just throwing spaghetti at a wall to see what sticks as far as what exists at the intersection of mental health and firearms culture. I mean, and I'm sitting and I can't figure it out. I'm racking my brain. I'm jotting notes down. I'm, chat GPTing. I'm like, I want to find a way to blend these two things together in a way that feels congruent with my values, official, educational, what have you. And I think it was a couple Fridays ago, 2 weeks ago today, I was sitting in my office and I was reading, I think it was Truth About Guns, the blog, and they had an advertisement bounce across the screen, and it was for Walk the Talk America. And I was like, what's this? And I clicked on it and I was like, oh shit, like this is everything I had been looking for or trying to, you know, ideate in this very well put together, thorough, as established uh, platform or package. And I just got really excited. And I think the email I sent you was, maybe 5 minutes after sort of digging in and being like, I got to get in touch with these folks and, you know, in whatever capacity I can, just connect. And so that's how this all came to be. And yeah, I'm just excited to be able to get to speak with you all and get to know you and share ideas.
That's pretty awesome. And I'm guessing Kevin's backstage pumping his fist in the air, because I'm going to take a guess that that's one of the ads that we got comped to us in that partnership, right, Mike?
Yeah, I think so.
I can't think of who it was. What's the name of the group that did that? Yes, thank
Yeah.
you, Bleecker Street. Yeah, so already paying dividends. That's awesome. They comped us a bunch of ads to float into different outlets, and just landing a new clinician in a new area of the country, in a new state, it means the world to us, because as we're trying to grow out our 2A friendly provider directory, that right there, just like for me, that's worth it, right? So that's pretty awesome in and of itself. So let's back up a little bit. You got a story behind this that we briefly covered. You weren't always a therapist, and I would like to hear that in a little greater detail. And I'm sure the listening audience would as well. So walk us through who you are and how you came to be, because I'm curious about this. We all have our great stories. Not everybody
Yeah.
lands in therapy and gun land.
Yeah. Yeah. So I grew up in the Boston area, Cambridge, Massachusetts, and I went to college up in southern Maine, studied African American history and Spanish. But in college, I always knew at some point that I wanted to work with or around or in the music industry. I grew up with, buddies who were also into music. So we were making music, recording music, performing music, seeing music, all of it. We were just really into music. And
What kind? What were you doing?
I grew up on a lot of soul, a lot of Motown, a lot of older soul, R&B, Motown from my parents. And then, um, it's funny, the first album I ever owned was Sum 41, which was like a pop
Yeah.
Not
punk
soul.
edition. Yeah. Yeah. And so, but, when I was about 13, I remember I first heard Kanye West's first album, The College Dropout, and remember hearing he would cut up all these old soul samples that I would hear from my parents' music, and I was like, whoa. And it was one of the first times that mainstream urban or rap music felt accessible in the sense that I can see myself in this person, right? I mean, I couldn't relate to 50 Cent or some of the other big major label artists that were popular at the time. And Kanye West College Dropout was really that bridge for me. So I got really into hip hop and rap music, and then it sort of just exploded from there and started diving into a bunch of different genres. But yeah, as far as what my friends and I were making, it was a lot of rap music and then kind of dabbling in some other things. But that was the main focus. And you know, throughout high school we'd do that. And then at some point I realized like I don't want to be a performer or an artist, but I was really interested in the business side of music. And as I sort of navigated college and took classes for my major and for my studies, in the back of my mind, I was always thinking, well, how do I just get to work in music? And senior year of college, I remember just going through the alumni directory and sending cold emails to anyone I could find who was even, remotely adjacent to music, and ended up connecting with someone who had graduated from the university maybe a decade prior, and he was out in Los Angeles, and bought a plane ticket, flew out there to meet him, and went back to school, and after school packed up my car and drove out to Los Angeles. I graduated on a Sunday. I was on the road on a Tuesday, and I was 2014, and did that for almost 10 years in a few different capacities. I first worked in music publishing, working with songwriters and producers on the creative side. Then I did some management, and then I went and worked at a record company. It was at Island Records, and then jumped over to a different record company, went back to Island, and that was sort of around the time where I was becoming a bit disillusioned with all of it, and ultimately, made the pivot to grad school to pursue a master's degree in clinical psych.
Mike, feel free to jump in with your own questions. I got a head full of them because I mean, Mike and I both are way into music. I DJ'd for a zillion years, starting in high school sports, going to college parties, dances, nightclubs, bars, weddings. And so I'm deeply appreciative of all genres of music, and playing a lot of Black people music for white kids in Reno, Nevada. That got me into hip hop too. That was fun. And then of course the weddings, I spanned, I got really deep into the adult contemporary weddings type stuff, and I was researching it. And so I love it. And I know Mike does too. He's way into the music culture and the stories of the artists. So my curiosity about what disillusioned you centers on how the industry has, I don't know, evolved, I would say, but probably more like devolved, because we used to have really good music produced, and now we have catchy hooks that get produced for streams as opposed to longevity and, good, thorough albums. And I don't know if that's a part of it, or if that's just me as a fan going, man, music sucks these days. But it also dovetails into why you would pick psychology. And I'm guessing there's probably some curiosity overlap there, but I'll let you, explain that, because I'm curious about all that.
Yeah, I mean, I think with the advancement of technology and access, right? Everyone can be anything. Anyone can, record something, anyone can record it and upload it. And what are you only you're always only 2.5 minutes away from virality, right? Like you make a hit and it goes viral on TikTok, and people's lives are changing overnight because of that. And it's become a lot easier to create music. It's become a lot easier to share music, to access music. I think what that does is two things. It gives everyone an opportunity, but then there's so much noise, right? And one of my first job in music, my first paid job, was as an executive assistant. And the sort of culture around that is like, all right, go get the coffees and schedule the meetings and do all that. And then on the side, you're hustling, trying to find the next thing that's going to get you off of assistant duties, get you the office, get you the expense budget, et cetera, et cetera. So I would sit and listen to playlists on Spotify of bubbling or rising artists all day long, trying to find what's going to be the next big thing. And there's a lot of noise. There's a lot of noise, and some of it, a lot of it doesn't stick around. A lot of it just fades away. And then in all that noise, there are some gems that go on to be something meaningful. But it's funny. Worked at Interscope Records, and that is the premier record company in terms of major labels, right? That's, you got Kendrick Lamar, you got Eminem, who else? I mean, Nine Inch Nail. I mean, massive record company, and it was the dream label to work at. It's like, if you're I don't know, a basketball fan in California, and it's like working for the Lakers, playing for the Lakers. It was just that. As a kid who had no connections to the music industry, getting a job there was huge. I had, sort of while all this is happening, had my own journey or experience with mental health. I remember I was just sort of, it's like everyone wants to eat the sausage until they know how it's made. And so you get inside and you start seeing, oh, okay, this is a business before anything else, right? And there's so much behind the scenes that we don't see. I mean, you know, the average person goes on Spotify or Apple Music or buys a CD and listens to the song, and this is great. And then when you see all of the sort of behind the scenes efforts to get that song to where you get to listen to it, there's a lot of talent, there's a lot of hard work, but then there's also a lot of ego, a lot of people who, you know, almost move as if they're the artist, and a lot of kind of gatekeeping and I don't know, boxing people out because, well, if signing this artist is going to get me ahead, I don't want you anywhere near it. And that's not just competition outside of different label systems, but also within label systems. I mean, I'd seen people on the same team sort of push each other out of deals to try and keep it, just theirs and theirs only. And, the real turning point is when I was at Interscope. I remember getting to work one day and I'd seen a news flash or tweet or whatever it was that an artist by the name of Juice World had died, and he was signed to Interscope at the time. And I didn't know him or I didn't know his team super well, but people at Interscope did. And I remember getting there, and they had a counselor on site for people who wanted to talk about it. And I remember walking into my boss's office, and there was another executive in there. And from what I gleaned just in overhearing the conversation, it was, well, how do we spin this, or how do we, what's the next step? And it felt, I mean, really gross, to be honest, in terms of here's a 17-year-old kid who was a huge artist for the label, and he's just died, right? And he has family, his loved ones, and the conversation that I'm walking into is, what are the next steps marketing wise, and how do we, I mean, they didn't use the word capitalize, but how do we capitalize on this? And I was really just like, wow, this is really that transactional. And and around that time, I had access to a lot of the budgets for artists in the system, and sitting there and I was looking through all the numbers, and this is what an artist will get when they sign a record deal. This is what they'll get on execution of the deal. This is what they'll get in their marketing budget. This is what they'll get in their tour support budget. This is what they'll get in their radio promotion budget. And I'm scrolling, and I'm like, there's nothing in this for a mental health budget. And there's nothing in this for a wellness budget. These are artists who are, I mean, not all artists, but many artists, right? Making music about some vulnerable things. Some of them are, singing or rapping or making music about their mental health or drug use, or, Amy Winehouse is a great example. She broke through off a record that, I mean, they tried to make me go to rehab and I said no, right? The whole record is about her relationship to alcohol, and I think what we would call alcoholism or dependency. And that's ultimately what killed her. And thinking about where were the people along the way who are responsible for marketing this record and making this record and promoting this record, like where are the people and where are the resources for an artist like that to offer support? And is that not even a priority, right? Like, what would a sober Amy Winehouse have sounded like or sang about? And I don't know the answer to that, but is that what the thinking is behind? And just let them do their thing. And you know I don't know, it sort of veers into tinfoil hat territory, but I felt that more people than were willing to admit were complicit in pushing artists in directions, or pushing artists to create art without supporting the human behind the art. And that just wasn't aligned with my values. And I wanted to do something that felt more altruistic and more people oriented, more than, business oriented.
Yeah, that resonates with me because that's how I felt. I love guns. I love the Second Amendment, but I feel the same way. That's why I kind of went on the mission I did, which was basically, come on, gun companies, like we sell this product to our customer. Let's care about their well-being as well. It's not just necessarily self-defense. You know what I mean? It's not saying that we're responsible for it, but I love the fact that you're kind of tying a whole like you could do both. You could support the
Yeah.
music, release the music, and also be supportive. And, you know, for people that are like listening to the music, and it's just like firearms. Firearms companies can be a resource for everything from mental health to de-escalation. So I get it, man. That's cool.
Mike, did you see that, what he described in the modeling industry too, where you're just a commodity,
Yeah.
basically?
Yeah, I mean, that was definitely it's the same way there. I mean, the thing with the modeling industry too is like there's so many models that come through. Like if you don't play the game, you're out and no one cares unless you break like huge and then you can kind of shot call. But yeah, it's the same thing. But, you know, to be honest, like it wasn't my agents or my agencies that was making me do the fun, dumb things that I was doing. It was just a lifestyle and you're in it, you know, living in New York City at 21, you know, having money and being able to do whatever you want. It's easy to kind of become a loose cannon. But yeah, there's a lot of parallels to that. I think you know, everyone's so against like corporate social responsibility, and it's such a term that people freak out about, but I don't see it as a bad thing. You know, that's how I think industries get ahead and get left alone. Just as we talk about the, you know, DUIs with the alcohol industry, or, you know, we, Jake, you and I live in the cities where there's gambling everywhere, and there's, you know, everywhere you go, you see something for, hey, got a gambling problem, you know, call this number. It's like, it's little easy things that you can do where, you know, the public's opinion of you kind of changes when they see you make an effort. So for sure.
You picked clinical psychology as a graduate degree and a master's program, which if you're in this field, you understand that pretty much gets you nowhere because you need the PhD. But you picked clinical psych and then became a therapist, which is tough to do. I'm curious about that journey also. But I want to make a little finer point on this too. I think the reason that corporate social responsibility is poo-pooed or panned, I guess, is because largely it's just a virtue signal. They don't actually care. Like, does BetMGM really care about the bettors, or do they just want to put 1-800-GAMBLER up on the app just so they can check a box? You know what I mean? And I think that oftentimes is the case. It's not that they do deeply care. Like Stanford's explaining, you know, his values are misaligned. And then he jumps into healthcare. Let's talk about misaligned values in healthcare. But that's a rant for later. I don't feel like getting stabby on a Friday morning. But
No, but
the
that's a huge part of my
it's
rant,
true.
right? When I'm just like a little like, you give me a microphone, I'm just like, "Ah, rah, rah, rah," I'll just go off about, you know, my frustrations with healthcare. And the joke I have with myself is like, yeah, I wanted to leave music and do something that was, you know, entirely altruistic. So I got into healthcare and then I realized, oh, wait, you know, healthcare is a business also. And I was like, oh,
Right.
man, no one told me this.
Yeah, there's a lot of suffering that goes along with it, and I'm in the middle of it right now. But you so tell me about clinical psych as opposed to like anything else, because if you have your mindset on being a therapist, that's not the path you take. How did
Hmm.
you pick that?
Yeah, I've just always been fascinated with people and you know, understanding people and understanding psychology and the psychology behind so many things, right? I remember thinking about, you know, when I worked in music, like how songs become catchy, how artists or songwriters write hooks. What are the things that resonate with people? How do we understand people better? What do patterns of behaviors, where do they come from? And really just understanding what makes us tick and saw it as an opportunity to learn something and also use it as a stepping stone to becoming a therapist. And, you know, it was a really transformative experience for me. They told, or one of my advisors at the time said at the beginning of the program, you know, a lot of people come into this program in relationships, and a lot of people leave the program out of those relationships because of the kind of transformation that you'll go through and just understanding yourself better. And that for me was the biggest piece of it, was just learning myself better, understanding myself better through these clinical lenses and seeing a lot of growth because of it. And, it's almost like realizing how little I knew, right? It's like the man who knows he knows nothing or something like that, right? Like I didn't realize that there was so much that I was blind to about myself and in myself until going into a program like that. And I had an academic advisor named was Joy Turek. And I remember, early on in my time in the program, she had said to me, when you have a reaction to something, stop and ask yourself why. And I like, what are you talking about? And I remember letting that sink in and being like, oh, because so few people actually do that and understand what's driving the way I'm behaving or the way I'm moving through the world and the way I'm interacting with people. And the program itself was incredibly helpful for me to do some reflecting that I needed to do about myself and also work towards this new line of work that I was wanting to get into.
That's a very common theme among students who get into mental health programs. Is they first what you say is the same thing I heard back in 2010 when I joined my program. It was beware of what you're about to discover about yourself because you could find yourself questioning literally everything. And it's not that you want to abandon it all; it's that you want to know well why you believe what you believe, the values that you hold, the passions that you have, so that you can truly make them your own, and they're not just unconscious reflection of whatever life handed you, right? And I think that's often understated, and we don't necessarily go in with fully informed consent to that process. Now, you come out the other side and you have forms that you make the patient sign that say, do you really consent to this process? Because you could learn a lot, and not all of it's going to be friendly. Some of it's pretty spooky. You also have on your website, and we'll get into the firearms thing in a minute, but you have on your website something that I've noticed also recurring across multiple social media accounts, a couple of good friends now, where you say, I was really searching for a therapist and I couldn't find any, so I became one. It's like, yeah, because there's a lot of therapists out there who are really bad at what they do and they don't push, they don't grow. We don't have to get into the function of why that is. That's a product of what's happened with accreditation in graduate schools, just lower academic rigor. And we're just not pushing people because I don't know, it's like discomfort is tantamount to harm and harm is therefore bad and unethical. So we just won't make people uncomfortable. Unfortunately, that's how you grow. So it's not surprising to me that that's your testimony. It's a little surprising that you put it out there, but I'm noticing it's more and more recurrent. And I think that resonates with audiences who would seek mental health services and are not sure what they're going to find. You openly state, I'm in this because I was frustrated and I had to become what the other people weren't, right? So I want to hear your story about that. It's a more common theme nowadays than I think ever before. I think previously people were like, I want to get in and help people and maybe help myself along the way. Now it's like, man, this field is terrible. I'm going to go in and make a difference. Jake Freeman is another one. He happens to be in Montana. You were in Montana at one point. And I'm excited to connect you two because I think you'll hit it off. But tell me a little bit more about that.
Yeah. And I just want to make a point to something you had stated a moment ago. And one of the things that I often share with prospective clients and people that I work with is, drawing a distinction between safety and comfort, right? I mean, the work that we do together, you'll always be safe and you might not always be comfortable, but being unsafe and being uncomfortable are two different things. I don't know that we can do this kind of work. I can't do this work as a client, as somebody seeking out therapy and expect to not be uncomfortable. But for myself, I know the difference between feeling unsafe and uncomfortable, and I try to encourage people who might seek me out to kind of explore that as well. Like, what does it mean to be uncomfortable versus what does it mean to be unsafe? Because they are different. Completely lost my train of thought. The
No,
question that you had
that's okay.
asked,
It's good to hammer that point though, because as clinicians, we're supposed to create an environment that's safe enough to be uncomfortable so that we can
right?
unzip you as the recipient of care, explore these scary, difficult things, and then zip you back up when you leave. And then you can come back trusting that we're not going to harm you along the way, right? We're gonna push you into discomfort or disequilibrium so that you can grow in a comfortable, safe way. And I think that's really critical. I think that a lot of that's gone lost because the therapists themselves, because they were never pushed into discomfort through grad school, they were never challenged, they were never questioned, they didn't have to examine their introjected beliefs. They themselves don't know how to do it later. So it just becomes this ping pong of conversation where we're just petting each other instead of actually endeavoring to make deep, meaningful change.
Yeah. Yeah. And, and speaking to, I don't know, what drove me through this, or what drives me through this line of work, is wanting to create access to mental health care for people who maybe aren't finding it, because that was my experience in a lot of ways. I mean, if you look at demographics of who providers are, it typically leans heavily, it's mostly white women, and black men like myself are fairly underrepresented in the profession. And there are so many pieces that go into that and why that is, et cetera, et cetera. But I had a hard time finding somebody, not necessarily that looked like me or who was also a black man, but who spoke my language, and not even just literal words, you know, maybe offered a way of thinking that felt aligned with how I think. I think sort of, you know, at the big scale, and I think in a very abstract way, and really like to, I don't know, get existential. A lot of it just felt a little too cookie cutter and a little too like, are you a lighthouse in the ocean searching for your meaning? What's your purpose? Like, it just felt like too much of that. And I would scroll through Psychology Today and everyone looked the same. I I gotta be careful what I say. There was this, it almost felt like a trope. It was like probably a woman who looked a very specific way with a wide brimmed sun hat and a Brene Brown quote in the bio. I was like, man, none of this lands for me. None of it. And wanted to make something and be something for somebody who might also be seeking someone who maybe just wasn't that, and wanted to do it in an
Yeah.
authentic way.
So we're going to get into your firearms journey, but did you notice anything about firearms with that too? Like, the fact that and Jake will back this up, that there's a lot of clinicians that are anti-gun by nature, right? So did that come into play at all? Like, you're just like, I'm a firearms owner and I like shooting guns. Like, did you know that there was issues with firearms and the profession? Did you know that gun owners are afraid to go talk to clinicians? Were you aware of that, like, when you got into it, or is that something you learned later?
It's something I learned later, but I think I almost learned it sort of outside the profession first, in terms of, or I guess I always knew it, but I was confronted with it outside the profession and then sort of started seeing it more, in the work. Montana is a very unique place in a lot of ways, and it wasn't as, like, what you're describing wasn't as loud as it might be in other places. But there were certainly folks who had their own biases or stigma around it, in Bozeman, but it didn't exist on the forefront of the conversation.
What made you go to Bozeman from LA?
Yeah, I had. It's a great question. Yeah,
From
yeah,
Bozeman
yeah.
to from LA to Bozeman? I think there's gonna be a steel
Bose
guitar in that
Angeles.
one though.
Yeah, I had been in LA for about 10 years or so, and I knew I wanted something different. I wanted something smaller. I wanted something, where I felt I could put my roots down and be a part of the growth of something, rather than just trying to find any little seat I could get at a table, 20 tables away from the big table in Los Angeles. I mean, it was unaffordable. I wasn't working in music. I couldn't make that make sense. Like, you know, I needed something different, and Bozeman to me felt like it's small enough, but it's still growing, and there's space to get in and be a part of that growth. And I'd spent a little bit of time in Montana and out west, and really enjoyed it when I visited. And I had a short list. I wrote them all. There was Bozeman, Montana, Burlington, Vermont, and Missoula, Montana. And Bozeman just came first alphabetically. So that's where I started. And I think I reached out to 3 practices total, and the second one was where I ended up working because I really connected with the owner of that practice. So I didn't even explore Burlington or Missoula. I just, you know, things clicked very fast with Bozeman, and yeah, made the move out there.
All right, tell about the firearms journey.
Yeah, yeah. So being in Bozeman, it's very outdoors oriented, a lot of outdoors enthusiasts, climbers and skiers and snowboarders, snowshoers, all the things snow. And I didn't grow up a big snow sport person. I mean, I snowboarded a handful of times, but it wasn't really for me. Played a lot of basketball in Montana, but I was sort of wanting to do more that wasn't the outdoors portion of it. And then also, you know, not looking like a lot of people in Bozeman, Montana. There were times where, like the drive from Bozeman to Billings, I'd pull over and get gas, and I was like, "Man, this is like incredibly rural. It's just me," and I was driving this big red Jeep at the time, and I was like, "If anything were to happen, I'd want to know how to defend myself." So, signed up for a handgun course, a basic handgun course. Instantly fell in love with it. I fell in love with the smells, the sounds, the sights, all of it. I mean, you know, hearing the ping against the steel and you know, seeing the way that the bullets would pierce the target and all of it just at once was so overwhelming and stimulating in a way that was like, this is the itch I've been trying to scratch for a long time. And just got sucked in. It was one of those things where I it's like getting tattoos, right? I remember getting my first tattoo at 18, and everyone's like, "Well, once you get one, you just can't get one." And so after getting my first
Yeah.
firearm, people said, "Yeah, you get it." Like, "Well, you just you know just know that like you get one, but then I want another one." And then I was very much that stereotype of like, well, this one does this thing, but this other one does this other thing, and this one does this thing, but it isn't a striker fired, and this one, and really just started consuming it as much as I could. And in Montana, you can shoot on public land, and there was a lot of public land, and so you know, if I wasn't going to the range, I could go to this section of town and set up some targets and just shoot. And it was very, very therapeutic. It was very relaxing. It was very, just the degree to which I have to be present in order to do it and do it accurately and do it safely. I mean, it was something I hadn't experienced before, and it was very, very good for slowing down. Grew up, I was diagnosed with ADHD when I was 13. I was bouncing off the walls for the entirety of my life. Shooting was something that really helped me slow down and just be present. There was some irony in that, right? Because I think a lot of the dialogue that I had been privy to about firearms up until that point was a very different kind of dialogue. And,
Mhm.
I think one that a lot of people are used to hearing and you know, there are reasons for
Would,
that.
would,
But
would you say that you were like gun neutral before that experience, or were you more anti-gun?
I would say that I was gun neutral. Yeah. I would say, and I've asked myself that question a lot over the last couple of years, like, who was I before all this? And I don't know. Yeah, I can't say that I was anti-gun. I mean, I think there were things that, like, things that I didn't think people needed, or, well, maybe that person shouldn't have that thing. But as far as sort of me at my core, it was pretty gun neutral. I remember first getting into guns and then being, what's the word I'm looking for? Shame is too strong of a word, but certainly like afraid or fearful of what are people going to think of me and people around me and people in my circle. And I remember calling my dad one day and being like, "Yeah, so I think I'm gonna get into guns." And he was like, whatever, and I'm like, oh, okay. But I was expecting like this huge backlash for it, and it wasn't that. And he would come out to visit me in Montana quite a bit, and I would take him out to the range. I mean, it wasn't like as fun for him as it was for me, but it was cool to sort of have him shooting the 22, and it's like, all right, that's enough for me, but that's cool that you do it. And um, yeah, I was definitely somebody who, I mean, it was an insecurity. It was, I don't want to be judged in a way that I see people being judged for participating in the sport, participating in this hobby. And, I would catch myself. Somebody said, "What'd you do this weekend?" And I either not say, or I'm like, oh, just hung out, whatever, lie, omit, or the ways I would catch myself kind of backing into the conversation. I couldn't just say I went out shooting or I like guns. I would say, well, I'm really into recreational target shooting, and trying to sort of present it in this, what I believe to be refined way that people weren't going to judge me for, or have something negative to say. Yeah, it's funny to see that kind of code switching, if you will, happening in real time for me. And I go, why did I say it like that? Why didn't I just say, I collect guns or I own guns? I think a lot of it is not necessarily shame I hold towards myself, shame that others sort of put onto people, for a variety of reasons, right? It's not just guns, but that's the way that I experienced it. And it's been a very eye-opening experience. It's been a very eye-opening journey. One of the things that really drew me into the Walk the Talk America organization and what you all do is on the website, sort of highlighting the value of nuance. And nuance and accountability are my two favorite things. And with nuance in particular, it feels like people don't allow a lot of space for nuance, firearms culture, but also in mental health, right? And experiencing that quite a bit in the firearm community, where, it almost felt like I grew up in a very progressive background and was like, well, you can't be progressive and own guns. And I was like,
Right.
oh, okay, I can't, you're right. And then one day I was like, well, why not? People with whom I was having those conversations, a lot of times it was a lot of virtue signaling. Well, these are bad beliefs or these are harmful beliefs. And I'm like, okay, well, what about the Black Panther Party? And they'd be like, well, that's different. And I was like, talk to me. And they were massive firearm advocates, gun advocates. And, what would you say about that? And a lot of times people wouldn't have anything to say, because I was like, well, they didn't know what to do with that. But here are people whose whole organization was about self-defense, and it was about, they would walk the streets of Oakland with their guns in their hands. They went to the Capitol building and,
Yep. So only time
yeah,
the NRA backed gun control
right.
is after that.
The Mulford Act, which was
Yeah.
an NRA-backed gun control to keep guns out of the hands of Black people. And my point in all of that is to say is, like, there's so much nuance to it, and realizing that getting into guns and getting into firearm culture was revealed to me that we as people, as society, right, wherever you fall on the spectrum of socio-political beliefs, we don't allow for a lot of nuance. And we claim to be understanding and compassionate and respectful of differences, but we don't walk the walk, right? Like, we don't do that. We judge people, we shame people, and all of us are capable of it. All of us are guilty of it at some point. But, you know, it's it was a really frustrating experience. It was a really eye-opening experience, and something that I had to grow from, because it definitely revealed to me some of my own insecurities about, wanting to be accepted or not wanting to be bad, and, you know, also being a part of something that I really enjoy. And I can see, there's a lot more nuance than people allow for.
It's so great to hear that. I mean, it's not, it sucks, but but it's great to hear it from somebody else's lips because, man, we have gotten pretty fatigued, seeming like we're the only ones trying to explain that there's stigma on both sides of this. We hate the sides thing, but it's both sides of this self-imposed chasm of, you know, firearms owners who want to seek mental health care experiencing exactly what you just laid out. And then mental health practitioners who are like, I like to go shooting too. Am I allowed to talk about that? And anybody who's listened to this long enough, you know that I refer to it as coming out of the closet as a concealed carrying therapist. Same, like your testimony is identical. And Mike's got his own story about how he had to closet himself when he was working. But you should tell that actually. I don't know that we've
Yeah, please.
shared that story much on here, Mike, about the time at the bar with the gal.
Yeah, with the girl that I thought. So no, when I first got into the firearms industry, I was kind of like you, man. I grew up. I was like gun neutral. I went to work, product of nepotism. So I went right into work after I graduated college for my family, and no one ever told me that somebody could hate you or judge you because of you being in a firearms business or you liking firearms. So I was like super naive. And I remember I was in Columbus, Ohio, and I was at a bar and I met, this is when I was young. I met this girl and we were talking for like 45 minutes. And I was like, man, this future wife material, this girl, super hot, super cool. 45 minutes in, she's like, what brings you here anyways to Columbus? And I'm like, I work for a firearms importer and I'm basically a sales guy. So I stop in at gun shops, and her whole demeanor changed. Like it was funny. Like you could feel it on her face and everything. So like I immediately see her. I'm like, oh, she thinks I sell guns illegally. I'm like, no, I sell them legally. And her demeanor did not change. I was like, oh, this is going sideways real quick. So like we start getting in talking about it. And at the time, I didn't have the passion that I have for firearms now. I would have been able to talk circles around her. But at one point, I got really frustrated because she was kind of saying like, I am the problem, right? So I was like, listen, I'm like, you're a white girl, you're a sorority chick from Ohio State. I was like, you probably feel like you don't need a gun. I was like, but there are a lot of people that do. And I remember she tried to use that against me because there's this huge bouncer. I mean, he was big black dude, right? She's like, come here. And I was like, oh boy. Like, and she's just like, tell him what you said. And I was just like, I re-explained it. And I remember he looked at her. He's like, he's right. I don't know where you come from, but where I come from, the cops won't even show up. I need my gun. And he walked away. And I was like, she definitely was like gone at that point. But, it was kind of like understanding. I started to lie. Like when I remember I got pulled up on stage. I don't know if I ever told you this, Jake, but I went to go see Zumanity in Vegas one time and I got pulled up on stage and the lady was like, what do you do for a living? And I was like, I sell bicycles. I just left it at that. Like I was going to be like, yeah, I work for a gun manufacturer. So yeah, I went through the same thing. I was just kind of like, wow, people can actually hate you for this and they can judge you for it. And, you could be completely responsible or have the best intentions, but it's one of those things that just evokes passion, which I appreciate. Like you said, the nuance, right? Like I don't blame anybody for hating guns. They don't really hate guns. They just don't want to see people hurt or dead, but they don't understand it.
Yeah, well, it's funny. When I went to my first handgun class, I had my P365. I had the trigger lock on it, and I had it in a case, and I had the case with the lock, and then I had another lock. I had maybe like 4 or 5 locks on it. And the instructor was like, "Hey, do you live alone? Do you have kids?" I was like, "No, no." "Do you live alone?" It's like, "No." It's like, "Do you have people over often?" I was like, "No." He was like, "Why do you have so many locks on it?" And I was just like, I was like trying to be responsible and I was just really excited and trying to do it the right way um but I don't know, just I had all these ideas of, well, if it's not locked up this way, it's going to fire on its own and then something's going to happen. I just was uneducated and it was my welcome to shooting moment of, there's a lot more that goes into it than just if you touch it, it'll explode. And yeah, it was an important sort of moment for me. But on the topic of nuance, I think about where we're at today in society. And, again, we have these two sides and we have this back and forth. And, we've gotten to a point where, how do I want to word it? Like, I can use race, class, gender as good examples. Everyone's like, well, men are the problem, or white people are the problem, or rich people are the problem. And it's like, well, individuals can be symptoms of a bigger problem, but it's not fuck billionaires. It's fuck systems that allow for there to be billionaires, because it's the system that allows for there to be people who have more money than the seventh wealthiest nation in the world, and systems of white supremacy and systems of patriarchy. Like, these are the things that are problematic. What you're pointing to are symptoms of the problem. But it's easier to say fuck Jeff Bezos than it is to, dismantle capitalism and like rework how people are impacted. It's just easier to say whatever, screw that person. And I think that's, again, the absence of nuance. It's like I see it in firearms as well, or in firearm culture.
Yeah. So you go from, you basically go from Boston to LA, but you had said like in Boston, you really didn't come across firearms. It wasn't part of life. You go to LA, you start working in the music industry. Naturally, you're going to come across hip hop artists. I grew up on NWA, you know what I mean? Like, so I was always grounded. I understood like these are lyrics. This is storytelling. Like, just because you have a gun, you don't go out and shoot somebody because like they stepped on your shoe, right? But like I've always struggled kind of with, we have a program, you probably saw it on the website, called Kids to Kings. And it's just an awesome program. And it's been one of those things that when I present it, because I do a lot of public speaking, especially at events that maybe are center left. Usually half the crowd is Black. And then I'm up there showing our Kids of Kings program, where we're showing young Black kids shooting, right? And also taking instruction, mentorship from the instructors. And it's kind of crazy how immediately like people are fascinated by it. And I'm almost like thinking, because of the music that we all grew up listening to, because everyone's conditioned to think like Black community, guns bad, right? Like there's nobody there that's really, when people look at little white hunters in the Boy Scouts or in Minnesota with orange vests, no one bats an eye. Like they're just like, oh, gun safety. That kid's like, into guns and he's a hunter and he knows what he's doing. But no one ever gives that opportunity, I think, to young Black kids or young brown kids. But having that, I'm trying to figure out the best way to ask this. When you were in the music world, did that ever cross your mind? Like, we got a bunch of kids right now that are just, like you said, if they don't have some sort of guidance to be like, hey, this isn't real, you know what I mean? Like you need to talk about your emotions, like conflict, de-escalation, like all these things that you can introduce to a young person's life while introducing them to firearms in a healthy manner so that they understand firearms. I mean, did that ever cross your mind? Like you said, you were a Kanye fan. Kanye wasn't using a firearm, and he was a backpack rapper, right? Like that's it's a lot different than 50 and everybody else who's going to kill you if you disrespect them.
Yeah. So do you mind asking the question again? I just want to make sure that I'm understanding.
I was going to say, like, were you conscious of firearms in hip hop back then, and did it have an effect on you anyway? And then when you became a gun person, were you like, this is really interesting? You know what I mean? Because it's not this, tool of death that's constantly portrayed in the music and in movies, right?
Right, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, and there were, times where you'd be in environments where it's like, oh, like this person out with, they have a backpack, but we're not going to school. Like, what's in it, right? And I just like, I'm not gonna ask you, like, I'm not gonna ask this dude, like, hey, man, what's in the backpack? Because I don't think he wanted to tell me, and I didn't want to know. But Yeah, no, I mean, it was definitely like some of these artists that you see, like they they do stay tooled up, right? Like that's just part of what it is. And sometimes it's not just like, oh, it's just music. Like, no, 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 no. That person really is about that life.
Yeah,
You
it's
know,
about that. Right.
right. And
Yeah, like
I
YG coming into studio is not he's I mean, we have Crips and Bloods, right? Like, and that's
mm,
what I mean. I think that sometimes the music paints a picture of an unrealistic what gun ownership is, right? Like gun ownership can be a lot of things to a lot of different people, but I feel like what I don't know if it's there's some blame on the firearms industry. I think that they didn't do a good job of kind of reaching out and developing programs, say like in inner cities or for underprivileged, underserved communities that's like introduces firearms in a healthy manner. Like, hey, you could be the next firearms instructor. You can come work for Ruger. You know, there's all these different things. Sometimes I think, and like I said, I'm a huge fan. I grew up listening to gangster rap. I mean, some of my favorite artists are pioneers in this music. So I know that, I'm not sitting here like this middle-aged white guy who's like the lyrics, but I do look at like, it's like Jake says, like if your mind isn't right and you're just hearing things on a repeated loop, you know what I mean? It gives you something to think about, right? Like we do debriefings with our kids in the Kids of Kings program where we talk about this isn't real. This is not how you solve problems.
right.
And then we bring them out in the range and they shoot these great guns that they play in video games. You know what I mean? And I would take one of my kids and put them against anybody when it comes to responsibility and safety, and I think that's an awesome thing. And I wonder where, like we have Twista. I don't know if you know that Twista is huge in the firearms industry and you know what I mean? But that's
I
about
see
it.
him on Honest Outlaw all the time.
Yeah, but that's somebody who's a firearms instructor who's out there, changing the minds of his peers about firearms and what it can be for certain communities. So, I think it's just it's an interesting dynamic. Like we love this music so much, but this music has a lot of irresponsible gun ownership in it. And I don't know how you change that, right?
Right. No, and that makes a lot of sense. And I think there's, also like the media plays a role in how it portrays or talks about groups of people with, with firearms or whatever you want to call it, anything really. Like media pulls the strings of how things are depicted and how ideas and images are sold to people. And I imagine if that you were to do one of those bias trainings and you were to ask 100 people, when you think of white man gun, who do you think of, right? And it's like John Wayne or this, whatever, like a very specific kind of person. And, if you were to ask those same people, what about a black man with a gun, right? And the way that those images are disseminating to people are different and have been different for such a long time. But people don't realize Martin Luther King, Martin Luther King Jr. owned guns, right? And that's not what people think about when they think about a black man with a gun, right? They don't necessarily think about Huey Newton or you know, canaries or Kamala Harris owned guns, right? Like the images are often 50 Cent. And so much of that is, I don't know, the machine behind all of it. I think there's some, marketing, there's sort of selling the story, getting the buy-in. The first person I ever worked for when I got into music. He was managed producers, and a lot of his producers early on worked on 50 Cents. There were producers under Dr. Dre and that worked on Get Rich or Die Trying. And so I'd walk into my boss's office and he'd have a plaque. And the plaque was this massive 50 Cent album cover, and the glass in front of it had the manufactured like bullet holes in it. And it was the most intimidating plaque I'd ever seen. It was like, when you sell 1 million copies or whatever. And I was like, whoa, like does look pretty badass. And, this is the image that I think people have of black people and guns rather than, you know, Black parent teaching their Black child how to safely load, unload, charge, put away a firearm. And I think there are a lot of things that go into that, a lot of things.
Stanford, do you have a preferred modality, a counseling modality?
It's a great question. I don't, it's funny, when I first got a job in counseling after grad school, it was one of the questions they asked, like, what do you like to bring into your work? And the easiest thing to say was always CBT. Like, oh, CBT, CBT. But, for me, it was always, how can I be a human first and then draw from modalities to sort of complement that? And I don't know, people call it holistic or humanistic or what have you, but it was really like, let's kind of bring to the forefront the things that are making us uncomfortable or causing us to feel the things we feel, and let's roll our sleeves up and get into it. And not so much, I mean, I've heard it referred to sometimes as transference-based therapy, but for me, I didn't want to stuff things into a box with some, here's a very neatly written clinical label that we can put on it. Let's find what works for you.
Yeah, I'm going somewhere with this, so bear with me. When did you graduate grad school?
It would have been 2021. Yeah.
And what school did you attend?
Called Antioch University.
That's funny. I just had a conversation yesterday with Leslie Elliott Boyce on Noggin Notes. She was an Antioch University dropout, as it turns out. Really interesting conversation. I'm excited to get that published. But where I'm going with this is, so 16 years ago when I started my grad program, I got the full introduction to modalities. And for the listening audience who's not savvy to this inside jargon and lingo that I'm using, a modality is a way that you would intervene in somebody's therapeutic journey. So CBT that Stanford mentioned is cognitive behavioral therapy. It's very popular. It's about redirecting or rearranging your thoughts in a less rigid way, basically. You're reconsidering and reframing how you're going about your life experiences so that you can be better in charge of them. It doesn't do a very good job of going deep. So along with the other BTs, the behavioral therapies, there's DBT, dialectical behavioral therapy, there's ACT, there's REBT, rational emotive behavioral therapy. There's choice theory, which is similar to that, but incorporates an emotional component. Reality therapy is an offshoot of choice theory. It's a Glasser thing. William Glasser is a big name in our field. He's done a lot of writing and work. But in the last 15 years that I've seen, and definitely in the last 7 to 8, I have seen an almost complete elimination of psychodynamic, existential, object relations, any of the deeper modalities that do what you're describing, which is meet the human where he is or she is and start from the core of that person and their soul, and then go to the outward behaviors. It's almost been inverted. Now, there's reasons behind this, some of which are money, because you can fund research that centers on changing behaviors in a quantifiable way for a limited period of time, such that you can declare victory over the behavioral change and then refund that intervention strategy, that modality, if you will. So if we can change behaviors, and there's nothing wrong with behaviorism. I like behaviorism. I integrate CBT all over the place. It's almost like it's second nature. If you're not doing behaviorism, you're not really doing therapy. But if you stop there, you forget the why to the what. You just overlook it altogether. So Jungian analytic psychology is a deep, meaningful exploration of the self. But we've moved sort of away from Freud because it's not as nuanced and not as deep, but Freud's stuff broke the ground. There's existential psychotherapy. If you read Irvin Yalom's work, he talks a lot about the meaning and the purpose and the value that drives people's decision makings, right? So all this to say, when I look at treating somebody, I look at past the behaviors, and I happen to believe that all the diagnoses in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual that we have, the DSM that we call it, they're all symptoms. I don't really care about symptoms. I want to alleviate symptoms because that's presumably what's disordering your life. But I want to know why you ended up on that symptom. So whether the symptom is anxiety or depression or drinking too much or body dysmorphia or whatever it is, I need to figure out the why to the what to get you healed sustainably. Because otherwise I'm just chasing symptoms and we're doing therapeutic whack-a-mole, which is great for keeping you on the calendar and padding my pocket, but doesn't necessarily make for good recovery longitudinally. The problem is they stopped studying that because it's expensive and it takes a lot of time, and you can't necessarily extrapolate it to a population. I also think there's motives behind this that have to do with the lack of rigor that I discussed earlier about how we're just simply not challenging people, because if you could just make it about the behavior, it's not about the person, and then it's a little less scary. It's more externally controlled. We can blame things for it, like our parents or the system or whatever, and we don't have to take personal accountability. And I think the reason I ask that is because against this backdrop of what's happened in the counseling profession, it becomes super easy for us to put labels on things, and then those labels get put on people, and then we end up limiting people, and we lose all the nuance. Because if I can slap a label on you as progressive black man from the East Coast, then I create a heuristic in my mind that shortcuts me to saying, well, I know everything I need to know about Stanford. I don't have to ask any more questions. So now you slap gun owner on there. And because gun owner forever and ever was like conservative coded or whatever, we lose the nuance that there are such organizations as Pink Pistols and Liberal Gun Club and Liberal Gun Owners and Armed Equality. And it's like, if you take that concept with that deep nuance and the deep diversity within the firearms community, and you present it to somebody who's a rigid thinker because they're leaning on their mental shortcuts and their labels, they can't reconcile the depth of a human. And I think that is really become problematic. And that's why you struggle to find a therapist. It's why I struggle to train up students and interns anymore, because they're coming out of grad school in these recent years, not knowing that there is something beyond the behaviors. So it's a shortcut. It is easier. You're right. It's easier for society to just slap labels on things and on people, because it prevents us from having to go deep. Depth exploration requires vulnerability. Vulnerability comes with risk. The risk is often to the ego that I have to let go of what I think I know and embrace something more. And why would I want to do that if it's A, hard, and B, threatens the way that I see the world? So some way we've got to push this message forward that it's okay, not only okay, but actually encouraged and required in some cases, to see beyond the outward label and see through to the depth of the human being, so that we're treating humans. But if you, for example, are coming out of grad school and you don't have that education because it's simply been eliminated from the curriculum, and by the way, it's been eliminated from the DSM too. We used to have this section in the DSM talking about defensive functioning, and they're really ego defenses to keep the ego intact so that we prevent going deeper into our true selves. They've just stripped that from the literature. And then they strip the curriculum down to behaviorism, as though people are simply just time plus matter plus chance or something like that. And then we don't have to look deeper. And then we end up fighting because, yes, backed by media that wants clicks based on certainty, they can provoke emotional responses based on what they want you to think about a black man with a gun or a white man with a gun. And what's crazy is the therapists feed into this with our Psychology Today profiles, because we're comfortable in our own little ego states. When everybody looks like us, we'll just play the same game and we'll cast the net super wide and be like, yeah, I treat all things and all people, and I can be the lighthouse of the ocean too. And aren't you also sailing toward my lighthouse? It's like, we have to decouple ourselves from this system that somehow has created a grifting opportunity to stay in business by not doing anything except making people feel better one session over the other, week after week, but we're not actually getting better. Like, I don't want to make people feel better. I want you to actually be better. And what we're describing here is symptomatic of that entirety of the problem, where we're just comfortable in our labels. It's like, dude, we're all deeper than that, man. This doesn't even make sense. But man, it sure makes money.
Yeah. Well, man, you touched on 100 things that just, ignited all these thoughts in my head, and I'm going to try and keep it
Fortunately, we
dialed.
have 2.5 more hours left of this podcast. So Kevin's behind the scenes cringing.
So the first thing is, I don't even know where to begin. I misspoke earlier. It was 2022 when I finished grad school. When I was
that
in
changes
grad
everything.
School, yeah. When I was in grad school and subsequently, I noticed there were so many like performative based counseling, like meaning like clinicians or aspiring clinicians who started acting like clinicians. And I remember
Yes,
going
yes.
to dinner with some friends, some colleagues in Los Angeles, and one of the servers was like, "Oh, you all seem like fun." And someone was like, "Well, we're therapists." And I was like, "Man, don't put me in that." Like, I hate that. I hate that so much because it's
Label.
almost this
There's a
like,
label.
right. And it serves a purpose, right? I think this idea that because I'm a therapist, I am this morally and emotionally superior person that gets it, and it's edgy and it's cool, and it's like, ooh, it just would just rub me the wrong way because it was almost it felt just as disingenuous or inauthentic as the very thing that oftentimes we as clinicians are trying to break through or slice through when working with somebody. And it was, you know, virtue signaling, and it was performance, and it was just ego driven. It's all about me. And I I don't know why. It has just always rubbed me the wrong way. And so,
It's
you
artificial.
know, right. And
It's artificial.
somebody, right. Somebody recently asked me, like, what's your therapist network like? And I was like, well, I don't really have one, in part because I work by myself and with myself and for myself, but also because I think I had a lot of experiences where you talk to another clinician, and then it was almost this who can flex harder, like who can use the bigger words, and who can, "Well, I know this," and who can be more of a therapist. And I was like, I don't I don't want to play that game. I played that game for almost a decade of my life working in music. I don't want, and I played that game. I'm not sitting here saying that I wasn't, responsible or guilty or capable. I did it, right? Like pull out the measuring tape. Like, I did it. I get it. But in this line of work, it's like, I don't want to do it. And it felt like there were a lot of clinicians who I experience who, it's like, let me be the smartest. Let me be the most therapized therapist and therapy everything. And it just, I don't know, a lot of ego behind that just rubbed me the wrong way. But
Yeah, it's wild because we're supposed to be non-judgmental and lifelong learners and always questioning. And it's like, yeah, like you alluded earlier, we're the cattiest, backstabbingest bunch of pretentious people you'll ever meet. Like, on the whole, not everybody, obviously. Fill in your own not alls, but it's uncomfortable. And I think the answer is simply that we're just not authentic. We are victims of the same stuff we're trying to teach other people how not to be, which is don't project, don't wear a mask, be authentic, be vulnerable, be humble, continue learning, always be evolving. And yet we arrive. It's like, no, I've arrived. I know everything. And then when we get threatened by somebody who is a little more humble, a little more confident, a little more authentic, it's like the walls go up and the ego ratchets, and they spit out the 75-cent words. And I'm just sitting here like, we didn't corner the market on human healing. Like, we arrived 5 minutes ago in the span of humanity. Like, humans have been healing each other for a really long time. Let's not take ourselves so seriously. But let's honor what we do and keep it at a professional level. But don't think you're all that. Especially when, I don't know if you experience this going through grad school, but the professors would absolutely trash talk other professional licenses. Like, the social workers weren't as good as the MFTs, and the clinical professional counselor, the licensed professional counselors aren't as good as the psychologists, and the psychologists only do behaviorism, and they don't understand systems. And it's like, just stop, man. And of course, don't the life coaches, man, life coaches are just dirt, right? They're like below dirt because they haven't met the minimum standards that the state set. Like, come on, people. It's crazy.
yeah,
What do you guys
I
what do you guys think, real fast, because I have a question for both of you. Like, from a gun owner standpoint, right? Like, where's a positive outlook to seek help, right? Because, like, you guys are kind of like dissecting like what's wrong with, the profession, right? Saying people are judgmental, but we have listeners who may want to get help. So how do you kind of break out of that? Or like, what would your recommendation be if you, I mean, I know it's a tough question to answer like on the spot, but Like, how do you combat that? Like, how do we know that there are some really judgmental therapists. We know that there's some therapists that either intentionally or unintentionally scare the hell out of gun owners. Like, how do you become welcoming to that? Like, I think with Jake, we've always had this issue, right? It's like people call us all the time and they're like, how do I find somebody that
Well, it
I
would
like?
help if I got off my dead butt and reworked Pam Garfield Yeager's list of how to find a good non-judgmental clinician and tweaked it toward gun owners. I've been sitting on that for months, so we will at some point publish that. I just have to do it. But Pam's got a list of how to find an appropriate clinician who's not going to indoctrinate you or expose you to some authoritarian ideology or crowbar you into their worldview. So I could do that. That would be a nice way of looking at things. But you want to I default to if they have a psychodynamic background, there's a pretty good chance that they're not going to be doing what we describe because psychodynamic by nature requires individualism. It requires honoring the individual instead of the collective. And I think right now we've got a problem where the entire therapy industry has moved toward collectivism at the expense of the individual. So we've lost accountability. That's why we're shirking our personal accountability. We're blame shifting. We're pointing at systems instead of people, and we're using blanket statements. So if you can find somebody who's got a psychodynamic background, that's usually a good indicator. But short of just interviewing the person and asking good questions, which I will put up a list, I don't know. And I think that's what makes it so frustrating. Kevin's asking what's psychodynamic for those who don't understand the term. They'll just say, psychoanalytic, psychodynamic, Jungian, Adlerian. They'll say that on their profile, but it's hard. Like it's very hard because in the sea of therapists, we have all tried to cast the net super wide, meaning that none of us are good at anything. That's how it comes across. So it's like you're scrolling psychologytoday.com where all the profiles typically live, and they all look the same, and that's the problem. However, it's probably because they are all the same. Like 85% of us are just not great. I
I
don't know. What do you
think,
think,
and
Sanford?
yeah, I think there's two things. Well, I think a lot of things, and I think a lot. But as far as people seeking out therapy or counseling, I use those words interchangeably. Rather than going into it like, how do I want my therapist to be, or how do I want them to look, or how do I want them to think? One of the questions I encourage people to ask of themselves is how do I want to feel? How do I want to feel with and in relation to this person? And I think that's often a great place to start because it gives us, a target, so to speak. And you know, we are pretty good judges of character of how we feel talking to people. And I'm hoping that, you know, clinicians are offering introductory complimentary consult calls just to give people sort of a taste of what it is that they do. But, you know, leaning into how do I want to feel after talking to this person? And based on the time I've gotten to speak with them, how do I feel? I think trusting ourselves more to take into account, like, a client might not be somebody with a master's or doctoral level degree, but you're a pretty good judge of how you feel after you interact with someone and, you know, maybe not shying away from discomfort as we touched on earlier.
Yeah, yeah. I would say too that if your therapist doesn't have an articulable goal that you created with that person in collaboration to get you off the calendar in a reasonable time frame, and reasonable is whatever it is. I mean, you can be dealing with some deep stuff that takes half a year to solve, but you should be off the calendar. You should have a goal, and you should be terminating from treatment. I analogize it to physical therapy versus personal training. So physical therapy is when somebody's recovering from an injury. The goal of physical therapy is to return to pre-injured state. It's not to continue growth afterward. That's where you hire a personal trainer and you go to the gym and you get your leg stronger after the ACL repair. Physical therapist is there to get your ACL and your atrophied muscles returned to pre-injury state. Therapists should be doing that too. There's disagreement on this. It's not a hill I'd particularly want to die on, but as long as we're married to the medical model and managed care is governing our treatment and paying for it through insurance or whatever, I think we need to be mindful that our job is to return you to pre-injury state. Now, there is a role to play for clinicians to grow people beyond that. And you will absolutely grow during your treatment. I'm not saying you can't, but to keep somebody on the calendar simply by digging for more issues is, I think, one of the red flags that you could find very quickly in session 1 or 2. Say, hi, Jake, Stanford. Nice to meet you. What brings you in today? And then you say that, and that's your problem, right? I'm anxious. I'm nervous all the time. I'm constantly worrying. Okay, what's your goal? Well, I'd like to be calm. How do we quantify calm? Well, 5 days out of 7, I'd like to not have this excessive worry. All right, we can get there. Then I'll throw some interventions at you. If I jump straight to interventions on day 1 and I say start journaling, and you don't know why you're journaling, I think that's a good tell that you're not with a good clinician. I don't care about like political ideology or any of that stuff. I care about effective clinical work. And effective clinical work is measured by an outcome. The outcome should be what the patient wants as a goal. Now, I, as the hired expert, should be advising you on that, just like you wouldn't go into your PT and say, yeah, I've got a right ACL reconstruction, but my left calf is underperforming. Also, the PT is like, I'm not treating your calf. I'm treating what you're in here for. After we're done with that, I can explore some options on how to fix your other calf. But usually they'll send you out to somebody else because they're also billing insurance for this problem too. So I hate that the medical model, I rarely use the word hate, and I've used it twice now. Hate that the medical model has done this to us. It should be more free flowing. I would love to give initial consults so people can interview, but that's not the world that we live in when we're sending claims to insurance and they want to know right away, what are you treating and when's it going to be fixed, right? So that is an indicator. Is if you're unsure of what the goal is and your therapist isn't constantly checking in with you on your measurements to that goal, probably go at least bring it to the therapist. Say, hey, look, I've been coming 6 times. I still don't know what I'm doing here. I'm not really progressing. I feel great after I talk to you, but week over week, I'm not really improving. The therapist should honor that and redirect. If they don't, pull the plug, go find somebody else who will. That's one glaring indicator, I would say, is if you're directionless in your work. But yeah, I'll get
Yeah.
that list
So
up.
yeah, right. I was gonna say in Stanford, how are you like I mean, your website's phenomenal. Like Jake and I
I love your
love
video. That opening
the
video is great.
video is
That's one way to tell if somebody's got a video up about themselves, you can read them pretty quickly. You don't even have to go like, if they produce some content, writings, that's a good way too. Sorry, go ahead, Mike.
no, I was just thinking, like here we are, we have a black man with a gun, like our friend Ken Blanchard, Jake. That was the greatest name,
The
black man with a
original,
gun.
the
We
original
have,
Black Men with
yeah,
a
the
Gun.
original black man with a gun. We have a black therapist with a gun, like who's pro gun, right? Like it's such an interesting dynamic. And you would get people that will come to you just because you understand guns. So guns are important in a lot of people's lives, right? Like you talk about lead therapy, subscribing something like that for people that maybe are anxious or suffering from anxiety, where you're like, hey, have you been shooting lately? Maybe you should go shooting. And that screws up a lot of people because they're like, wait a second, hold on, like you're telling somebody that might be suffering from depression to actually go shooting, like that's not good, but it can be,
Paul
for many
Santilli
it
has a whole
can.
paper about it. Paul
Yeah,
Santilli, military social worker, he's got a whole paper on it and nobody will publish it.
yeah, it's a
He has a whole
shame.
paper on why firearms can be useful and should be integrated into therapeutic process, just like you would assign somebody more exercise or, walking around the block or petting their dog. Nobody will publish it. It's crazy, but it's true.
I'll have to check
Yeah,
that out.
do you see
I'll email it
yourself
to you.
kind of advertising that, like, or is that just something you just wait till that would come up? Because obviously sometimes you have to ask questions about a firearm in the house, right? But
Totally.
it's like, yeah,
Yeah.
like who's at,
Yeah.
what's the intention?
Yeah. No, I think there are things about me that people are going to look at and see that I don't have to advertise, right? Like, when I lived in Bozeman and I had my Psychology Today profile, like they're just going to see that I don't look like 90% of the other people that they come across, right? And you know, so it's like what separates me that I do or I'm sort of tweaking behind the scenes, and what separates me that is just going to separate on its own. As far as, and if I'm understanding your question correctly, are you asking like am I sort of advertising myself as, or leading with, this is how I view firearms in particular, or just want to make sure I'm
Right,
understanding that.
right. That I mean, because you've been through. I mean, your accolades in firearms is just, hey, I went shooting in the rural areas, and I like guns, right? Like you actually competed in
Mhm.
firearms
Yeah.
competitions, right? So something like that, to where it's almost like, if I saw that, I'd be like, okay, like he's the type of guy that I can go to talk to, and I don't have to worry about him ever, whether you can or cannot in your state, right, Jake? Like we always say that, but the perception is the reality. When someone thinks a clinician can take someone's guns, that's a problem, right? Because that means that they're probably going to lie about their gun ownership, or they're just going to avoid you completely,
Mhm.
with that belief system. And I guess what Jake and I have been pushing for a long time is for clinicians to be like, I'm neutral or pro. Like, it just seems like a lot of clinicians just avoid that because of the the judgment that will be placed upon them if they say, like, yeah, guns are normal, guns are healthy. Like, it's not an issue. You know what I mean? It's an interesting spot for you to be in, because you like I said, a lot of people would go to you simply because they're like, gun guy. Like, I don't have to worry about when I said, like, hey, I went out shooting this weekend and I shot 1,000 rounds. You're going to be like, oh, okay. Like, how was that? Is that cool? Whereas some people would be like, wait, what did you just say?
Do I need to call the cops? Yeah.
Right.
Right.
Like, or that's a lot. It's like, yeah, it's not that much. um,
Yeah. No,
I
that's a
don't,
great question. Yeah. So I'm not secretive about, or even opposed to talking about my relationship to guns or firearms. And, for me, when it comes to self disclosure, I ask myself one question, and, who is this for? Is this for me, or is this for them? And if it's in service of the person I'm working with, I'll disclose almost anything. And, I think that I've had clients come in who, maybe kind of dance around the gun stuff. And when they learn that Stanford's somebody who isn't going to shame me or make me feel away because of this thing that I do, it almost, I mean, not almost, I think it helps strengthen the therapeutic rapport and the dynamic that we share. And that's happened a couple of times, right? And then as far as, almost looking at it outside in, right? Like, I'm part of a membership range here and down the road. And I bring my business cards there because I want people who are into shooting and who are in the shooting sports to, like, I don't want there to be this divide between, and this is going to be a word vomit, but like guns and being a man and mental health. Like, I think if we can just tear all of that down, or the divides that exist between those, about what it means to be a man who owns guns, and, maybe that separation between being a man who owns guns, who also seeks out mental health help. If we can break down that wall or tear that down, I think there's more opportunity for people to feel better, to live better, to, I don't know, feel less threatened by vulnerability. And whatever I can do to kind of help promote that idea or promote that way of thinking, be it self-disclosure, because it benefits a client and that's what they're seeking, or in what I do outside of the therapeutic space, you know, I want to be a part of that. That can be applied to so many different things. But I think around firearms is maybe where, I don't know, there's the shame can get really loud, and perhaps then people get really quiet. But yeah.
A lot of what we try to do is visibility, right? We're trying to bring it out, and that flies in the face of what we're often taught in school, which is don't talk about yourself, don't be on social media, don't say hi to your patients in public because you're going to breach their confidentiality. It's like, no, we're the only weirdos that do that. Every other profession that handles sensitive information has no problem waving at their client in the middle of Costco, right? We're the weirdos. We're the ones who perpetuate the stigma. And so I have a much larger public profile than most other people, just by virtue of the fact that I do work like this, but I intentionally have a YouTube channel. I mean, Zephyr Wellness has a YouTube channel. It's got one guy on it. It's me, but we intentionally have a YouTube channel. We intentionally have social media presence. We intentionally go to tabling events in the community, and we lay out all our literature, some of which is Walk the Talk America stuff. And one of the things we're going to mail you some stickers, but this stuff you can download, and the listening audience can't see it if you're not watching on YouTube, but it's a flyer. It says mental health, it's okay to talk about. It's very similar to the flyer that goes in the gun boxes. On the flip side, there's white space for a person like yourself to stamp your own logo or staple your business card to it. And you can set that in the gun range or the club or the shop or wherever you are. Just set it on the desk, right next to the register. We've got the Guns and Mental Health stickers, which we'll send you some of these too. You can just lay them on the counter and people can pick them up and take them. Everybody likes a shiny sticker. And here at Reno Guns and Range in Reno, I'm constantly replenishing the stickers and the flyers because it's a passive, non-threatening, arm's length invitation to say, oh, these two things can coexist in the same space. It's a dialectic. It's not a binary. And that's why I call it guns and mental health, not guns or mental health. So I appreciate the heck out of what you're doing there. And again, the listening audience couldn't see Mike and I, thumbs upping and silently applauding when Stanford's like, I bring my business cards to the gun range. But that's a great way to do it. That's how we combat this. We have to be out about it. You don't necessarily need to bring up guns every time you're in session. I mean, they're already in session with you. You don't need to do that. What we need to do is be in the community openly talking about this at the barbecues and the pool parties and the celebrations and in churches, and just casually referencing, oh, wear your shirt. It's like people see me and they're like, what's the intersection of guns and mental health? And then boom, you're off and around with a conversation. You get to talk about the organization. You get to promote yourself. And now I'm talking with therapists here. But that is a way to spark the conversation. For the firearms owners who are not therapists, talk openly about your own struggle, maybe not your struggles as you're struggling with them, but as you overcome them, say, yeah, I had a struggle. I went to a therapist, and they're like, you did? How was that for you? It was great, right? They didn't judge me. And I'm not depressed anymore. Now I'm not having mood swings. Now I'm not drinking so much, whatever it is. And putting the testimonies together, I think, really helps. It's incumbent upon everybody who's a part of this process to take part in the collective action. So, it's nice to have little shortcuts of like, how do you find a therapist? I think it's incumbent upon the therapist to be out enough so that when a Google search pops with your name, people can affiliate what you're really about. Are you about permanent problem resolution so they never come back through your door? Or are you about, let's just talk about stuff, right? It'll be pretty obvious, I think, if you create a public facing profile. And I know it's not everybody's jam, but if you can, and you're about this work, that's a good way to do it. It is tough. It's tough to punch through all the labels and the binary thinking. Is that good? Well, that's probably a good place to stop, huh?
Yeah.
There's a
I think
question from Kevin in the
Yeah, go ahead, read it. Yeah, how do you bring up firearms and storage with your clients?
Yeah, I bring it up in sort of as direct a way as possible. If that's something that, they've shared with me, that they use firearms, their own firearms. As far as the storage, I mean, I think it's, where do you keep your firearms and where do you keep your ammunition? And if somebody is in crisis, do you have people that you can let know where these things are? And do you create distance between, your firearms and your ammunition? And, trying to talk about these things. Like, one of the things that I think early or new clinicians struggle with is talking about suicide. It's uncomfortable. It's taboo. It's, ooh, this is bad. And I mean, suicide destroys lives. And I understand that, but if we're wish-washy or too delicate in talking about it to the point where we don't talk about it, well, then we can't have dialogue, we can't have education, we can't have conversation. And I think firearm storage and firearm safety is similar, right? If we're not talking about it, if we're not addressing it in a direct way, no one really has an opportunity to learn anything about it.
Absolutely. Yeah, we didn't pay him to say that, by the way, but it could have been word for word from our training.
so. I guess we should. I'm gonna ask the final question that we ask all of our guests.
I tend to my mental health by connecting with folks, en vivo experiences with people. I think there's so much of my day to day that's interacting with people in this clinical capacity. And it's very important to me to have in real life experiences with people that are sort of about me and my relationships. Getting dinner with friends, seeing my parents, visiting my family, whatever it is, I do that. Spend a lot of time in the gym, spend a lot of time at the range, and trying to learn. I've always been somebody who appreciates learning, and it doesn't have to be learning about work related things. It could be learning about dogs. I love dogs. You know, love learning about things that have nothing to do with what I do between the hours of 8 and 6, Monday through Friday, or whatever it is. It's creating, diversifying the things that I do with my free time and making sure that I have free time to do it. There was a period of my life or in this career where, you know, it became so consumed with the clinical work that I didn't have that space. I didn't have that time. And this is a great full circle moment, because what got me into the place of how do I, add some new flavor to this work was how do I bridge firearms and shooting and firearm culture, something that I enjoy as a hobby and that I enjoy competitively, with this work that I do. I want to find a way to sort of, create a more dynamic way of doing this, and, you know, keeping it fresh. And that's when I began letting the gears turn. And that's when I ultimately found you guys. So it's trying to diversify how I spend my time, what I think about what I do, and doing it with good people. So I can I can say wholeheartedly that in just connecting with you all and having this conversation, I've checked all of those boxes, and just talking to good folks, learning and finding different ways to talk about the clinical stuff through these different lenses, and keeping it interesting. So I have a lot of respect for what you do and how you do it, and I'm super grateful to have connected. It came at a very important time in my life. So thank you.
Yeah, likewise.
For the same answer. That's a really good one. It's never the same answer. Thank you, and, I'm gonna follow up for sure and connect you with a few other people I think you're gonna enjoy talking to also, and we'll make sure to drop some stuff in the mail that you can distribute in your community. And for anybody else who's listening, go to the website and download any of the literature and the materials. You can print them off yourself wherever you print things and distribute them as you see fit. If you like this, please share it around, and invite other people to follow along and support our work. And sometimes that support is financial. You can make a donation. Sometimes that support is just being a good ambassador in your own community. So glad to have Stanford as part of our crew now, because I think he's fits really well.
Yeah. Can I plug a book real quick?
You may.
We want you to plug everything. Plug how
Yeah.
people can
Where do
find
people
you.
feed you?
Yeah. Oh, so, and this isn't even my book, and this is, whatever. I'll just say the things and I'll tell you about it later. But one of the books that was changed my life in terms of my experience as, a firearm owner is a book called Gun Curious by, I think it's David Yamane.
David
Yamani.
Yamani.
Yamani,
David
I'm
Yamani.
sorry. David Yamani.
I'm in the book. He donated. He gave me a whole chapter. I'm in the book.
My goodness. I'm just,
Now you're putting two and two together.
that's so funny. That's so funny. Wow.
We're in
Okay.
there.
Yeah.
So
Yep.
yeah,
There it is.
it's all coming together now, because I read that book like a year ago, and that book was life changing in the sense that, like, wait, this is far more nuanced than anybody I've been around has allowed me to believe it is. And, I can hold these values that are very important to me as far as what, diversity or equity or inclusion looks like for marginalized communities. And I can, care about the unhoused community, and the financial crisis and things that impact I can care about all these things and be a firearm owner. And those two things are not mutually exclusive. And that book was a pivotal moment for me, and truly being okay with myself and how I am in this specific way. And so, again, I have no skin in the David Yamati game, but, I always try to plug that book when I can, because I think there are a lot of people out there who probably have similar experiences, and the closeted gun owner thing. I mean, you know, I I get it, and so that book was huge for me.
Well, he's gonna love to hear that, and you're gonna love to hear that he's just an awesome guy. So, if he never wrote that book, like, he's somebody that I consider, underutilized in the firearms industry. You know, we push forward certain people to send some messages, and I think David would be one that I
Did
would,
we lose Mike?
I'd be if I could control it, I'd be paying.
Oh, there he is.
Yeah, I would pay for David to work the circuit and tour and talk if I was the firearms industry, you know? So David's just an awesome guy, and that book is great. I mean, I've bought that book for people not because I'm in it. It's literally because I think they can relate to it. You know what I mean? Everything about that book is fantastic. So for the listeners, yeah,
He's
I'm
got a good
endorsing your
Substack
plug.
too. He's got a good
Yeah.
Substack too. I can't remember if the Substack is called Light Overheat or just the YouTube channel, but if you just look up David Yamani on Substack, he's such a thoughtful guy. His writing is so good. It's always enjoyable. I read every single article that he writes, and often I comment in the comment section because there's equally thoughtful people in the comment section of his Substack too. So for people who are listening and want to learn more about that, yeah, it's the subtitle is A Liberal Professor's Surprising Journey Inside America's Gun Culture. And also, just like the 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 paper that can't get published, David had a really tough time getting this book published because guns. It's like there's just such a bias. It's crazy. Pick it up
Yeah,
wherever you can. Share it with your friends. He's a good dude.
yeah,
So
I
how do
love
people
that
get a
book.
hold of you, man?
Yeah, www.sugarcounseling.com. That's the main way, or Stanford at sugarcounseling.com is my email address. Yeah, I'm always open to dialogue, conversation, sharing, exchange of thoughts, and hoping we can find more ways to do this and more ways to connect, because this has been awesome. And for anyone listening, you know, I'm open to all perspectives, opinions, feedback, ideas, and want to do more of it. So please,
Yeah, and
please feel
sugar
free to
is
connect.
SHUGAR, right? Didn't you use an
It's
SH?
SHUGR, and yeah,
GR. Okay.
yeah, yeah. And the awesome. It stands
Kevin's
for
on it.
Stanford helping you get right. I don't know. Always made me laugh. Everyone was like, "Oh, sugar, what's that?" It was just this. I just thought it was funny. So, but
Are
yeah,
you on social media?
I'm not. I'm not. I'm very, very much not. But I have like
You're
I have
very
the
healthy.
no. I have like the burner accounts and stuff. But like, I not on social media in a private or public way. It's like, who
Okay.
is who is I forget what the burner account's name is on Facebook and Instagram, but it's something funny.
No, it's all good. I just wanna make sure everyone can get a hold of you, but go to his website, that's I'm always envious of people that aren't caught up in the social media thing. It's a
No,
gift and a
I was
curse.
at one point, but that's news at 11. Yeah, that's a whole other thing.
Well, I
That's
appreciate you
awesome.
taking the time. I appreciate what you're doing. I appreciate all the out of the box thinking, and it's nice to meet another like-minded individual. So we're going to do good work together in the future, I'm sure. Thank you. And on behalf of our entire Walk the Talk America family, we wish you all great mental wellness. Take care.